Second wave feminism. This wave of activism was inspired by the civil rights movement. Women filled important positions in the SNCC and SDS. However, they believed that even these pure organizations fighting for civil rights felt a patriarchal ideas of male superiority. So they decided to branch off and create their own organizations. Their goal was to increase the role of women in society and touched on every area of women's experience, including family, sexuality, and work. This movement began in the early 1960s and lasted roughly 2 decades. Some prominent leaders during this time were Esther Peterson, Betty Friedan, and Eleanor Roosevelt. Each woman contributed to this wave in their own ways. Esther Peterson was the director of the Women's Bureau of the Department of Labor in 1961. With her encouragement, President Kennedy convened a commission on the status of women, naming Eleanor Roosevelt as its chair. The report issued by that commission in 1963 documented discrimination against women in virtually every area of American life. In 1963, the Equal Pay Act was passed by Congress, promising equitable wages for the same work, regardless of the race, color, religion, national origin or sex of the worker. Betty Friedan was married for 10 years. She was very dissatisfied with her life. She conducted a survey for her 20-year college reunion to see how they felt about their own lives. The results inspired her to write The Feminine Mystique. In it, she documented the emotional and intellectual oppression that middle-class educated women were experiencing because of limited life options. The book gained immense support and inspired many women to make changes on their own. In 1964, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 passed, which ended segregation in public places and banned employment discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex or national origin. With its passage, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission was established to investigate discrimination complaints. When it was clear that this group wasn't interested in investigating, Betty Friedan, the chairs of the various state commissions on the status of women, and other feminists agreed to form a civil rights organization for women similar to the NAACP. In 1966, the National Organization for Women was organized. Eleanor Roosevelt brought this movement to a national level and addressed the problem as much as she could. As the longest-standing First Lady, Roosevelt became aware of the barriers women faced and forced delegates to assign women to government roles. She also encouraged Franklin Roosevelt, the president at the time, to look into women's issues. In 1968, President Lyndon B. Johnson signed an executive order prohibiting sex discrimination by government contractors and requiring affirmative action plans for hiring women. Thousands of young women on college campuses were playing active roles within civil rights movement. Many were finding their efforts blocked by men who felt that women's roles should be limited to fixing food and running mimeograph machines. It wasn't long before these young women began forming their own women's liberation organizations to address their role and status. This era also brought forward many other things. Many women started to believe in abortions, pushed for no-fault divorces, and encouraged the view that marriage wasn't necessary. Many women started to create battered women's shelters and rape crisis hotlines to care for victims of sexual abuse and domestic violence. Women healthcare professionals opened women's clinics to provide birth control and family planning counseling, and to offer abortion services. For low-income women, contraception wasn't available to married couples until Congress allowed it in 1965.